live stream, Councillor Grocott. I think you should consider that a very fortunate, a privilege. I was going to say, I hope that's not... I hope that's not problematic for you, Councillor Grocott. Right, well, good morning, members, and welcome to this Adult Select Committee. We have a number of items to discuss, but can we start, for the benefit of the officer, Louise Corbett, who's joined us kindly to talk about the social housing grant. Can we all perhaps introduce ourselves, and it's also helpful perhaps for the live stream. So I'll start and then go to my left. I'm Frances Taylor, and I am chairing this Adult Select Committee.
Louise Brown, I'm Vice Chair of this committee.
Hazel Eilert, Scrutiny Manager.
Wendy Barnard, Democratic Services.
Maureen Powell, Councillor for Castleward and Abergavenny and a member of this committee.
Good morning, Louise. I'm Martin Grocott. I'm the elected member for Lansdowne Ward in Abergavenny, and I'm a member of this committee.
Right, good morning, everyone. County Councillor Ruth Edwards, elected member for Llyn-Tilly-Crossany and also a member of the Adult Select Committee.
Morning, Sheila Woodhouse, member for Growfield Ward in Abergavenny and member of this committee.
Thank you, members. I know that we have some apologies for absence. We have, and also I do believe that Councillor Dimmock will be joining us shortly, but I'll let Wendy give the apologies for absence.
Good morning. Yes, it's apologies for absence from Councillors Pavia and Harris.
Members, do we have any declarations of interest in items on the agenda? No declarations of interest. If something comes to your note, please declare it as and when. We have no notification of items for the public open forum, something which I do hope will change during the course of this civic year. So we move on to item 4, which is the Social Housing Grant Report, Performance Report on the Spending of Grant Monies, and defer to Louise to take us through a short presentation introducing the paper. Thank you for joining us this morning, Louise, and welcome.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Absolutely, this is just a short presentation to give an overview of our social housing grant programme for last year and the spend, and to just give you an idea of what we're going to be doing this year in the programme. So to start off with, I thought it would be useful to go through some key issues that we're facing in Monmouthshire at the moment with regard to affordable housing. So house prices at the moment, this was taken off Home Track on the 1st of April. The average house price is currently £301,900 for Monmouthshire. So that obviously makes purchasing a property out of reach for many people. And when looking at the affordability ratios, the lower quartile of earners within Monmouthshire would have to basically earn borrow 9 times their current salary to be able to afford to purchase a property. We also have a lot of pressure on our waiting list. So for Home Search, for example, there's currently 3,269 people registered on the Home Search waiting list for affordable housing. This includes social rented housing and intermediate housing, which is low-cost home ownership and intermediate rents. To give you some idea of the numbers of applications that we're seeing, last year, so 2018 to 2019, Home Search registered 1,711 new applications. There were 630 properties that become available, and only 471 households were housed from the 3,269 that were registered. Okay, the Housing Options team as well, they deal with obviously people that are at risk of homelessness or are homeless. They are seeing year on year an increase in their numbers. So last year they had 835 presentations from people that were worried that they were at risk of homelessness or were homeless. Of those people, 307 households were actually threatened with homelessness within 56 days. And 244 households were found to be actually homeless and requiring further assistance and support. So there is quite a lot of pressure around affordable housing at the moment and housing need within Monmouthshire. Last year, our social housing grant programme, we were allocated in total just over 5.4 million. So that was made of a social housing grant and housing finance grant. We did have a successful year. We managed to spend most of it, but there was a small underspend of £194,376. that underspend was returned to Welsh Government. Quite challenging in terms of land prices and being able to go forward with some of the schemes that we planned, and a couple of things fell through, but we're hoping that that won't be repeated this year. Okay, so we did manage to actually spend over 5.2 million of our allocation. And the 5.2 million that we spent, that will bring forward now 84 new build homes. It will help 10 people purchase a property of their choice on the open market, so first-time buyers. It will finance ex-council house buyback properties for Monmouthshire Housing Association, so there'll be social rented properties. And it also includes one rent-to-own property, which is a new thing that Welsh Government have introduced. So I thought it would be a good idea just to give you an example of actually what social housing grant does deliver, because the money that was set aside last year, those new builds may not come forward for another 18 months, 2 years. So as an example of some recent schemes, like these were delivered within the last 6 months. So Brookside and Caldicot, I know many of us have been to see it, but it's just a really good example of affordable housing and what new build affordable housing could be. So it's 25 units. It's on the site of an old sheltered accommodation complex, I believe, that was demolished before my time. But it's really lovely, like the layout, the properties, the way it's done is a really well done site. So that's a mix of 1, 2 and 3 bedroom homes, and there's also a couple of bungalows on there as well. So 25 units in total. And that benefited Brookside from 2.264 million. 2,264,000 in social housing grant. MHA also put some of their own private finance in as well to deliver that site. But like I say, it's a really positive example of what we can do. I thought it useful as well to flag up rural housing. We're always looking for opportunities for affordable housing in rural areas. It remains a priority for us. And through the Social Housing Grant Programme, we were able to support delivery of 3 units of rural housing in Tynton. These were finished earlier this year. Again, really good quality affordable accommodation. There's social rented properties. There's 2 3-beds. 2 2-bed, and 1 3-bed properties. We used our rural allocations policy to ensure that they were let to people with a local connection to the village. And there's just a little bit in the case study about who actually was allocated the property, but it was 2 sisters that were allocated fairly through the home search system and the rural allocations policy. They were both living at home with their children, their parents, and they didn't think they'd be able to actually afford to live in Tynton and were considering moving away. But luckily we were able to obtain one of these houses and just, feel very lucky to be in the situation to live in the village where they both grew up. So again, just an example of the really positive impact that it does have. We also help people purchase properties, so first-time buyers or people that are in a first-time buyer type situation. So if it's been like a relationship breakdown and perhaps they haven't got enough equity to buy on their own. So we do that through the new build schemes. We also do it through what we call DIY home buy, and that is where people can go out onto the open market in Monmouthshire and pick a property of their choice. And then we use social housing grant and we provide an equity loan then for a percentage to make it more affordable. So this is just an example of Nadia. She bought a property in Abergavenny. She had a relationship breakdown, didn't know what her housing options were. She worked, but didn't think she would be able to afford to buy a property. But through LCHO, she's actually been able to purchase 50% of that property in Abergavenny. And we've got an equity loan going into it for 50%. And it's just a little bit there about what a difference is made to her life and her son to live in like a settled community, close to amenities. And again, it's just an opportunity for her to do something that she never thought she'd be able to do. So it is working really well in terms of what we're doing. Future plans. So 2019 to 20, we've got social housing grant, obviously from Welsh Government again. Our allocation is reduced and it's going to reduce again next year. So we're not going to be able to produce the numbers that we have produced in the last few years. But we're hoping that what we have got is going to deliver us 41 affordable homes. So there's going to be new builds at Llanfair, Kilgeddin, Wern, Gifford. And we're also going to help people onto the property market through DIY home buy, so first-time buyers again. One of my priorities is to work with health and social care. It's widely recognised the benefit that good quality affordable housing can have on somebody's health and well-being. So we're doing a lot more joint working with colleagues in social care and also with the health board. So we're looking to support a new supported living complex or housing scheme in Abergavenny, which we'll be purchasing using social housing grant. Colleagues in social care then will manage that. And there'll be a support provider to provide the support. And I'm also working with health to identify opportunities for a scheme for people with learning disabilities. So these are all like Monmouthshire residents, have quite complex needs, so need something a little bit more bespoke and suited to their needs. So we're doing quite a lot of work in that area as well. So to sum up, like I say, you know, last year was quite, we were happy with how it went. It's short underspend, which we don't like. That hasn't happened before, I don't think, for many, many years. But we managed to allocate most of the funds, and we've got lots of plans for this year. And we believe as well we're going to have extra money from Welsh Government. They haven't confirmed it yet, but we're probably going to be given slightly more than the indicative allocation of just over 2 million. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Louise. Just one thing would be really helpful, and then I'll open it up for members' questions. In the report, you provide us with an options appraisal regarding the programme delivery plan. We were wondering if you could possibly just take us through those, because we are asked to come up with, you know, a preferred option. And I wondered if you could give us the kind of pros and cons of each of those options. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So in terms of the programme delivery plan, Welsh Government, as part of the social housing grant finance and the monies that we're given, we have to report on a quarterly basis what we're going to spend the monies on. So we complete a programme delivery plan, and it also helps me to monitor the spend and to make sure that we are spending our full allocation, and obviously we are living up to the intention. So the Q1 programme delivery plan for this year, which was attached to the documents, is basically just confirming what we plan to do with this year's allocation. So in total, the allocation on here is 2.8 million, okay? So there's a property that we are delivering in Wannistow Road, and it's quite a bespoke property. It's an 8-bedroom property. It's very specific to the family's needs. So we need to allocate some funds to be able to do the adaptations and the little bit of extra work around it, because it's not a standard off-the-peg property. So there's money allocated to that. We then are hoping to deliver. Now, this is very early stages. We're at the pre-planning stage, so planning hasn't been approved yet, but we don't expect that this should be any problems. We're hoping to deliver 5 new houses at Llanfair Gilgedin using the social housing grant programme. So that's going to be £673,000 that we're going to use towards that, and MHA will use their own private finance as well. We're also expecting that 20 units are going to come forward at Wern Gifford. And that's going to be a mix of social rent, LCHO, 1, 2 and 3 bedrooms, and some bungalows as well. So much like Brookside, is going to be a really good mix of affordable housing and quite a decent size. And there's going to be 1.93 million that's going to be allocated to that, so quite a substantial amount. And again, the Housing Association will be putting their own private finance into it. We've allocated money to Monmouthshire Housing Association for the ex-council house buybacks. We think they're really good value as a chance to obtain some of the old council stock back. You know, so they're good-sized properties. They're usually like a decent standard. So we've allocated money for MHA to be able to go out and purchase them off the open market. Like I say, we've set money aside for social care in terms of a supported housing project. We've identified a property in Abergavenny, and we're actually under offer for it at the moment. We're waiting to hear if the offer's been successful. So things are moving quite quickly with that. But the social housing grant will be used to part finance the purchase of the property, and then it's going to have to be completely gutted, and obviously the internals completely reconfigured to make it a suitable supported living scheme. So we'll be financing some of the renovations as well for that. And also we've set money aside for DIY home buy, and that'll be with Mellon Homes. So that is, like I say, when people go onto the open market, choose a property of their own choice, and we will finance that by way of an equity loan using the social housing grant programme. So there's quite a lot that's planned for this year. Like I say, Welsh Government have indicated that there is going to be extra money coming forward, so some of that is probably going to change, and there will be extra things added in, but at the moment we're still working all of that out. But this is basically what I use every quarter to check in. It's more than it quarterly with our housing association partners, just to confirm, are we on course, are we delivering? And with Llanfair Gilgedin and Wern Gifford, we would expect to see planning at September, October time, ready to draw the money down before the end of the financial year. So that's all being done.
Okay, thank you very much. Martin.
Could I just clarify then? Option 1 is the schemes that you've just outlined to us. Option 2 is we don't have to do any of that. And option 3 is we could have the money and somehow magic up completely different schemes
Yeah, absolutely. Like, option 2 would be to not utilise social housing grant,
Yeah.
not spend it. It would be returned to Welsh Government.
Fine.
So
I am
we-
now crystal clear in my own mind.
so we wouldn't be
Thanks.
delivering any additional affordable housing. Option 3, we can look at alternative schemes, but the reality is we do a lot of upfront work in terms of the schemes that we commit to and we allocate to. So if there were any other schemes that were ready this year to come forward, they would be considered. The programme delivery plan does offer a reserve list. So we've got things on the back burner as well, things that we're looking at for like next year, the year after, and they're on the reserve list. So they may come forward, they may not, but certainly we're looking like into the future as well.
Fine, thanks.
It's okay.
Thank you. So for Ruth
Thank you, Louise. I know it's a hard act for you to follow with Shirley that
Yeah.
had been here for a long time. And she knew it inside out. And we did appreciate all the work that she did. And I'm sure that you've been closely monitored by Shirley before you came to post. So welcome to it. We'll see you more in planning. When it comes to the rural allocation policy, my ward is very rural and we find it very, very difficult to get any housing whatsoever. But with that, it can only go to a new build for rural allocation. So when you say about MHA and others purchasing back, how does that fall then, that it doesn't cover then the rural allocation priority for those who are looking for affordable housing, but it won't be a new build if they do it that way?
Yeah, that's a fair point, actually. The rural allocations policy applies to new build developments. But that's something I think that perhaps does need further consideration, that if we do obtain an additional existing unit in a rural area, maybe we need to consider applying the rural allocations policy to that. Separate issue, but Home Search is currently under review at the moment, and I'm part of that process. So we are looking at the rural allocations policy in terms of the numbers as well, because at the moment it's a maximum of 10. Well, if we have more than 10 houses in a rural area, that doesn't necessarily ensure that all of those houses are going to go to local people. So we're doing a lot of work around that, so I can certainly feed that back and give consideration to that, absolutely.
Because 10 is an enormous number to get built on any village area. And also, even in just down the road from me, they built, Monmouthshire Housing had 9 bungalows built.
Mm-hmm.
And then they brought in the rule later on that it should be for only age 55 and over. Right. There's steps up to those houses. There's 3 sets of 3. And of course then, because you've got this criteria of having to be over 55, it means no youngsters in the locality can, bid for one of those at all. And they're not very convenient for older people either. So I have spoken to the hierarchy in Monmouthshire Housing about this many times, and it's the same in Grosmont as well, with having these bungalows, and they're saying they're only for over 55s, and they didn't always used to be like that. And so then, because of that, they will bring people in from other areas because of that criteria, and it means then older people who want to downsize in the area, or youngsters who want to get a housing and not live with their parents, they're out of the question. And I think that really should be addressed, because we've got a large school at Cross Ash that nearly all the children are bussed in. And if you don't have the availability for families to start somewhere in the countryside, all you get is a lot of older people that can't be supported by younger people in the area, which doesn't help the community.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Sustainable communities is about keeping younger families and households in the community, as well as older people, isn't it? It's about having that mix. That's certainly something that I'll look into. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was innovative housing monies that they had for those bungalows. So linked to that funding, it had to be for certain criteria, and that's what MHA chose, if I'm not mistaken, but I will double check that on it. Oh, right, okay. So not the new build. Yeah, okay. No problem.
Other members, sorry, Louise, can I just get you to turn your microphone off when you're not using it? Do other members have questions that they wish to raise with Louise? Councillor Brown.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just looking at Appendix 1, which on page 4, which says that at the start it says, approval will enable the delivery of affordable housing in Monmouthshire. It will allow us to utilise a social housing grant by Welsh Government and contribute towards the development of 26 new homes, assist 14 applicants to purchase a property off the open market, and provide 4 units of supported living accommodation for social care clients. Is that an effective summary of what option 1 is actually about? Because it seems as if the appendix suggests that. And the second question I've got is obviously, assisting people to buy is very helpful, and I just wondered whether or not equity shares could be considered in relation to the deposit, because often the difficulty in getting on the housing ladder, if you're renting, is most of your money is spent in rent, and then you've got a problem saving for the deposit that you need to purchase open market housing. And I just wondered if that was an option that could not necessarily in this year be considered, but at a later stage, because I can remember listening to somebody in Chepstow who said that they had a job, but because they were paying so much in rent, they had difficulty in getting the deposit to, or the income issue, I suppose, was another one. But I think sometimes we forget that in most cases, even years back, you needed 2 incomes to actually be able to purchase a property. And, friends tended to, if they weren't partners, then they would tend to share in buying a property. And I sometimes think if we just go on a single income, we tend to over-exaggerate, and go by average prices, because there are properties out there like even on the open market, sort of 1-bed or 2-bed properties. So, I think sometimes we perhaps have a tendency to say that there's a problem, but not realise there's other things. It's a question of what's affordable and what's not, because sometimes the open market 1 and 2 bedroom flats are more affordable than the ones that can be bought that are so-called affordable housing, so just wondered if, first of all, I'm probably getting a bit confused by so many questions, but the first question is Appendix 1, the option 1 on page 4. The second question really is about the idea of whether or not equity could be used to help people with deposits.
So in relation to point 1, absolutely, that relates to option 1 on the report. So that is what we hopefully intend to deliver if everything is approved today. I do note your comments about the deposit. It is an ongoing issue, and it's certainly something that we are aware of. Unfortunately, social housing grant, there's very strict terms and conditions associated with it in terms of what it can be used for, and it doesn't allow us to use it to support people in getting a deposit. The only way around that is the equity share for low LCHO, but there are other products that Welsh Government offer, and they're very new, and we've only done one of them so far, but it does sort of fill that gap in the market a little bit. So rent to own, we did one property last year in Abergavenny. We've asked RSL to look this year for options. What that does is basically people rent with the intention of them purchasing the property within a 5-year period. So they pay a market rent for that property. The Housing Association then set aside 25% of the rent every month, which is then ring-fenced and put off a deposit for that property if they then wish to purchase it after year 5. They are also gifted a percentage of the equity in that property. So the date that they start renting it, if that property increases in value between then and the date that they wish to buy it, 50% of that equity is also gifted with 25% of the rent paid, as a way of enabling them to have an increased deposit to be able to purchase the property they've been renting. Like I say, it's very new. So we've only done one, but we are looking for other options. So Welsh Government see that as being something that would fill the gap in terms of people not having a deposit. If they took the rent to own option, the rent that they're paying, some of it is being ring-fenced and put forward for that purpose.
Thank you very much. That's a really helpful response. Are there any other members' questions?
Thank you, Louise. Very helpful. I'm just struggling to understand the figures. Obviously, we're going to have a significant drop. We've had a significant amount of money in the past 3 years. So you're talking about filling the gap with other grants. Can you tell me how much money we're looking to get for this current year, and where you possibly think, do you know where you possibly think you could find the money to bridge these gaps? Because it is a huge difference. I'm trying to work out the figures that we're going to get, that we have had. I can see that, but what we're going to be getting for the forthcoming years.
Okay. Our indicative allocations of Welsh Government, which is in the report, for next year, or for this year, I'm going to say, was £1,966,257. When I actually add the allocation, they give us a little bit extra. So that's perhaps why the numbers are not stacking up. I've since had correspondence from Welsh Government that there's going to be additional funds again given to us because we've got the need and we've got the means to spend them. So at the moment, I'm working on an indicative allocation of about 4 million. But the reason why the numbers dropped is because when the current Welsh Government was sworn in, they set a target that local authorities would deliver 20,000 new affordable homes in this term of government. So to help us do that, they put a lot of funding forward for local authorities. So the social housing grant scheme was multiplied, it was doubled, trebled. There was a lot of money available over a 3-year period. So we have seen social housing grant spend of like 5-6 million for the last few years, but that was always going to tail off coming to the end of this term of government, and that's what we're seeing. They do have slippage, they do have other funds which they will allocate to social housing grant, but quite often we won't know until nearer the end of the financial year. What Welsh Government are doing is offering different funding streams. So there's things like the Innovative Housing Programme. So that's grant, that's available for housing associations, but obviously housing has to be innovative in some way. So it has to be like energy efficient and, you know, suit like a niche market, that sort of thing. You know, so there are different funding streams, like rent to own is another funding stream because it's geared differently, you know, in terms of the finance. That then causes complications sometimes for the housing associations to make it work for them in terms of using the grant and utilising it. But like rent to own is another funding stream that they think is going to be successful. Welsh Government, this is very early days, are launching a self-build programme where they're going to make it easier for people to self-build their own homes. So they're asking for local authorities to come forward with service plots of land, and there's going to be funding available for that, for people to be able to do that and to make it easier. So there's lots of different things that Welsh Government are looking at, as well as the social housing grant programme. But absolutely, the social housing grant programme, you know, the funds available 3 years ago to what's available now is just decreasing, and we're expecting to see that. There's going to be a lot of changes. They've just undertaken an affordable housing review, Welsh Government have, with regards to social housing grant. So I think we're expecting to see over the next couple of years some big changes with how it's administered and how it works. But at the moment, we don't know what that is sort of ongoing. They're reviewing it. So changes are coming.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you, Louise. That's answered actually what I was going to ask you. One thing that I always puzzles me, you have people that are buying half the house on a mortgage. Mm-hmm. Are they paying rent for the other half of the house, or what happens?
They're not. What we offer is called shared equity. Yeah. So basically, we give social housing grant as a equity loan. So the example I gave, the lady purchased 50% of the property and had a deposit and a mortgage for 50%. We then put an equity loan in for 50%, and that loan just sits there then until the property is disposed of. So either she moves on, sells, or circumstances change. There's no rent payable on that at all. What happens is when that property is then sold, we take back 50% of whatever the value is then. So if there's an uplift in value, there'll be a little bit of an uplift in what we recoup back in the sale. But equally, if property prices crash and it decreases, we would get less back than what we've put in. There is a product called shared ownership where they charge rent on the percentage that is given as an equity loan that's not owned, but that's not something we support with social housing grant in our finance. We wouldn't want to encourage that in Monmouthshire. So it is only shared equity that we offer.
Would they have the chance then, if they wanted to stay there and they got to the end of their mortgage, to turn around and buy the other half, and then it would be theirs?
absolutely, at any point, people can step up. That's what they call that. So even if like somebody just wanted to buy 10 or 20% more to sort of increase their ownership in that property and do it gradually, that's something that can be done at any point while they reside in the property, as long as their finances allow it, and the housing association is satisfied that it's affordable, because what we don't want is people being in financial hardship or overstretching themselves. So as long as we're happy that that's affordable, that's something that we can absolutely encourage and do.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick factual question, really. Interested that you mentioned a joint project for accommodation between ourselves and Health Board. Could you just say a little bit about how that would be managed? Would we be involved with the joint management of the property as well?
The scheme that we're looking at the moment would be managed by colleagues in health, because what we're looking at is people with learning disabilities that currently are in like a residential setting, so have quite high needs. So we would be involved in terms of acquiring the property, working with planning to get the planning permission, all that sort of thing. And it would be financed not through the social housing grant programme, but through a health funding scheme called the Integrated Care Fund, ICF funding. So we would use ICF funding to obtain that property and purchase it. Like I say, health then are responsible for the support. They would put care packages in place for the individuals, so everybody will be assessed. And then the housing association would have a landlord function then in terms of managing the property, repairs, that sort of thing. So our initial involvement would be just getting it up and running, sort of, assessing the needs, the ICF bid, all that sort of thing. But once the property is actually built and delivered, it'll be the housing association responsible for managing it, and it will be health that will be responsible for care packages and managing the people that are residing in their accommodation.
Oh, thank you very much, Louise. That's been really helpful. Can I just very quickly ask you, hopefully, two fairly simple questions, and then sum up. So the first is, you mentioned schemes dropping out of the programme, and that's why the underspend was sent back, 194,000. I just wondered if, very briefly, you could say why those schemes had dropped out, because obviously, ideally, we would want all the schemes kept into the programme. And the second one is, there are currently 3,269 people on the register, I think it notes in your report. I just wondered how often this gets kind of looked at, in the sense that there may be people on there who made an application and then maybe their circumstances have changed and therefore they don't. I mean, in the Health Board, they call it, they look at a list and you call, it's not a very nice term, I don't like it, but cleanse the list, i.e. check that those people still are in those circumstances and would wish still to be considered for housing need. I just wondered if you are able to respond to those two questions. Thank you.
Sorry, I can't remember what you asked me first.
Why schemes dropped out?
Oh, okay. So schemes dropped out is basically down to land values. So we talk with landowners, we're looking at opportunities, housing associations are bidding for land, and we think we're getting somewhere, and quite often a landowner might decide that actually they can get more money elsewhere, so things then don't go ahead as planned. That's an ongoing problem that we've got in Monmouthshire. There's a lot of competition for all available land. Housing associations could build a lot more, and we could probably do a lot more with different funding streams if we had the land to actually put the properties on. So it basically comes down to land availability and the cost of land, and being able to do a deal with the people that own the land, and being competitive basically on the market. So that's some of the issues that we face there. With regard to the home search waiting list, there's an annual re-registration process. So on an annual basis, everybody is contacted, and if they wish to remain on the list, the onus is on them to contact us and say yes. It's also an opportunity for them to update with regard to current circumstances. So if circumstances change, obviously their application will be assessed accordingly, and that might mean increased banding, reduced banding. It depends really on what their situation is. But yeah, that's done a rolling annual basis, so it's constantly.
Very much. Oh, sorry, Ruth.
Well, just clarity there, I think, Chair, when you said there's over 3,000 on the people on the waiting list. Does that mean people or households, which could equate to an awful lot more people, if you see what I mean?
is household, so that's
Yeah.
a lot more people.
Yeah. So it could be an awful lot of people in that need, couldn't it, that we need to
Absolutely.
address.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, members, for your questions, and thank you to Louise for presenting that report. So, in terms of just summing up then, I think that we are in agreement, members. I think that there is really only one option, which is to pursue option one and have a very clear programme delivery plan, because of delivering affordable housing is something which is very important to this council. Are we all in agreement with that, members? Yeah. I also note and wonder whether we wish to include this in our recommendation. So Councillor Edwards made an excellent point regarding the application of rural allocation policy, which currently is only used for new builds. And so perhaps we could recommend that the rural allocation policy, perhaps because obviously these are new schemes, you know, that are we doing the buyback and others, that we ask that is considered, that the rural allocation policy is also applied to other means of providing, offering homes in rural areas. Would you concur with that, members, that we support that the housing division consider looking into that? And you said that there's a review of home search being undertaken at the moment, so that is a very good opportune moment potentially, members. And I think that perhaps, members, it would be useful to note this, you know, we don't want to get into those wider conversations, but that we do note that the issue of land ownership and land value, and that the use of council land and council buildings is something that we look forward to seeing developed in the LDP, using innovative and imaginative solutions to the use of in particular land and buildings that are already in the council's ownership. Is that, do you think of anything else that I missed? Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, is it possible to add about the encouragement of the, it was referred to as rent to own, but in a sense it's a rent to buy. And I just wondered, a lot of people possibly aren't aware that this new scheme is available. And I just wondered if a bit more emphasis could be put upon that if people in the committee are in agreement. Thank you.
So effectively what we're requesting there then, if members are in agreement, is that we do all that we can to advertise all the different options that there are available for securing affordable homes to people. That would seem sensible. Members, are you in agreement? Yes, okay. And thank you very much. I think that concludes our discussion on that. And can I thank you very much, Louise, and I hope it wasn't too too hairy for you. Well, thank you for coming along. Thanks very much. Shall we move on to the co-option report while we wait for the finance people to join us? Yeah, I don't think this will take us too long, members, will it? Okay, so with your indulgence then, members, I will take you to item 6 while we wait for the finance officers to join us. And in front of you, members, you have a report suggesting that we consider offering co-option to organisations and individuals that have an interest in the areas that we discuss. And if you are in agreement, then we ask Hazel to put forward a report to full council, clarifying that, and then we would you know, perhaps we can have some correspondence, but I think generally, unless we want to make some suggestions, I think the suggestions that Hazel, you know, clearly not everybody may wish to or have the capacity to join us as a co-opted member. If you have any strong views on who that or which organisations that should be, and I don't know if Hazel wants to say anything further around, you know, how we would go about that. I think if you want to briefly summarise any points, but then I think we can just move on to perhaps agreeing that. Thank you.
This report that's brought to you today is a report to discuss whether you would like to co-opt people onto the Adult Select Committee for the term without voting rights. And if you decided to go ahead with this, this would require a change to council. I know we've discussed this briefly in the pre-meeting, but for the purposes of the public, we do need to just run through this report and explain that scrutiny committees do have the ability to co-opt people onto their committees with or without voting rights as part of the Local Government Act. Within the report, I've presented to you some options under 3.4 and some potential representation that you could consider, such as Access 4 Forum, Aging Well Executive Group, Age UK, Mind, Young Carers, you could consider tenants of RSLs, and also you could consider some GAVO third sector sort of representation. So, I mean, there would be other options if you thought of other options, but these are ones that I'm just suggesting to you as a starter for 10. You'll also notice that attached to this report, I've presented to you the terms of reference for the Aging Well Executive Group. That's a group that has quite a large membership and a range of organisations represented under it as a sort of umbrella organisation. So that might be a useful starting point were you wishing to consider co-option. They would have a useful starting point for you. Just to say, really, the options are you either remain as you currently are and you choose to invite people along as and when, or you can decide to go with co-option, have people onto the committee who could just attend as and when they felt the agenda was relevant. They wouldn't have to stay for the whole sort of meeting and every meeting. Just to also provide you with, you know, the sustainability implications. You do have to think about future generations, and you have to weigh up whether this is a good idea or not in terms of that. And under 4.1, I've given you some things that you might want to consider, which is making sure that stakeholders are represented in decision making. This is particularly because scrutiny is meant to be a vehicle for the public to have a voice in decision making. So in terms of this providing a democratic platform, that's for you to decide. It would also possibly help you in terms of ensuring more balanced consideration of future impacts of decisions upon people and particular groups of people. And you've had lots of equalities training, so that's something to bear in mind as well. I don't think there's much more to say to you, Chair, other than to draw your attention to the recommendations, and that's that you consider this paper, and if you decide to proceed, then let me know and we can take forward a report for you.
Members.
Thank you, Chair. I think Children and Young People Standing Committee, which already has co-opted members, is a very good example of how we as elected members benefit from the expertise that are often brought to these. I'm particularly keen to see GAVO at the centre of consideration, because that's an overarching organisation with a hell of a lot of expertise already there in place, supporting a range of other third sector organisations. But beyond that, I think that many of these organisations will be actually feet on the ground providing services that we talk about and often fund, and it would be great to have them involved in this committee. And I'm thinking at a very practical level, Mind in Abergavenny with accommodation for people who need support in the community. We give them money, and it would be lovely to have people representing them on the committee telling us about the benefits that brings them. So, yeah, I would fully support this.
Thank you very much. Do you have any other members with who want to add a view?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Certainly I'm in favour of having more co-opted members. I'm interested in hearing about things more from the grassroots basis. I certainly think that Age UK will be a good one because of the fact that they've got a, an overarching general view. I think we've got to be careful that we don't get people who just represent a particular area of Monmouthshire and, like Abergavenny, because, obviously there's might be different issues in Chepstow or Monmouth. So I think we've got to be careful about who actually would come on as a co-optee. And also, it does actually mention 8 particular groups. Now, obviously, we've got to be, have balance in the committee as well, because we don't want necessarily the number of co-optees to outbalance the number of members, So I think you've got to be careful about these things, but it depends on who is willing to come on it as well. But I think we've got to make sure that they are sort of general representatives that will cover the whole area of Monmouthshire and, not as a specific group. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, members. I think that the consensus was generally that it could definitely add a great deal of value to our deliberations. I take your point, Councillor Brown, but I think to be perfectly honest, if any or all of these groups of people are willing and able to come and give their time to add to our decision making, then that can only be a good thing. So I wonder whether we ought to ask Hazel to proceed with a report to Cabinet's Council, apologies Hazel, and subject to that being agreed, I think September Council is the next council that we have, isn't it? Then we can write out to those suggested organisations and see what their response is. I have to say, generally, on the point of people, outnumbering elected members, they're co-opted members. So if we are making a decision, I personally don't have any problems with anybody outnumbering. I think, as I said previously, the Strategic Transport Group, which is much heavier on the members of the public who have expertise than elected members, is one of the most helpful groups this council has, in terms of pushing that whole agenda forward. So if we're all in agreement, we can ask Hazel if she would kindly prepare a report for September Council, and it should, subject to that agreement, then proceed to write to that doesn't mean that we can't, alter or change that or during the tenure, and then we review that at the end of the term of council, so that we can see how much value that is adding. Is that okay, members? Are you all in agreement? I've got Ruth and Sheila.
Just to say that clarity should be given to the fact that they might be co-opted and give very valuable experience and information to us, that we do the voting and that they are non-voting people that come on board. I think that should be stressed. But they can influence our decision making if we've got as much information to make that decision. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, the proposal was that they would be non-voting. I think there's one thing for you to bear in mind, is that if they come onto the committee and they're co-opted on, that is for them to provide you with expertise. Whilst it will be interesting for you to ask them about their services and how that features and how that works in Monmouthshire, you've got to be very careful that they're being put on the committee to bring insight and to act as committee members, not to be held to account by you. So you wouldn't be able to scrutinise them directly in that way. Just to make that clear.
That's exactly my train of thought then. I was thinking, obviously, if we're going to have people bringing along their expertise, it could prove useful for us to be able to ask some questions, but I know that wouldn't be sort of the way this committee works. But that did go through my mind, that if somebody's talking about a subject and that you think there's more information there that, it would be useful for us members to know about. The other thing is about the actual makeup of who's going to be co-opted. how we're going to work that, how that's going to work in future with regard to being flexible. We don't want to sort of just set out a list now and that's it for the rest of the term. Are we going to make some plans to sort of add to this list as people make suggestions in the future?
Yes, and I was hoping that members might have some suggestions. They were just my initial starter for 10. So I think, it's something, unless you've got any more to add to it. I mean, we know with CYP Select, we do write out to organisations and not everybody would like to take up the offer. So I've put quite a good list there because I think we could reasonably get somewhere with some of that. And certainly with some of the bigger groups like Aging Well Executive Group and Access for All Forum, I'm sure that we would, that would be something that they would see as a positive thing. The carers groups in Monmouthshire, I've got contacts there. I know those people and I think that could work. So, it's a list that can be built upon. And if you've got other suggestions, then please offer them now.
And equally, that does not preclude us then, if we have a line of inquiry that we're pursuing or an area that we're pursuing, to invite other people in to give us information, evidence as part of our deliberations on whatever those matters would be. But I think it's a really good starting point because I have to say it's probably quite unlikely that all of them would be able to say, yes, we'd be able to come. And they certainly, I wouldn't think, would be able to come to all of our meetings because they obviously have lives and also, where they are employed, day jobs to carry out as well. So with your agreement, then that's what we'll do. We'll get a report to come to council. We'll, if that's agreed, write out to these organisations that we have now. If members come up with other suggestions, then that's absolutely fine and they can be made to Hazel. And also, I think we will review that and we will clearly, if we do get some members co-opted, perhaps run some, some introductory session for those people so that they understand the way in which everything works and they're comfortable and, get to meet us before a select. Yes.
Sorry, just on that subject, I think it needs to be clear that we would welcome, I think we should welcome people to come just for a one-off if it's something in particular on the agenda that somebody is really interested in, and that needs to be made clear at this point, that it's not just the people who are going to be invited to become co-opted, that it could, other organisations and groups of people should be made aware of what we're doing, and that needs to be clear at this stage, in my opinion.
I think that's a given, and I have to say it would be lovely if someone had something to bring forward to public open forum, or indeed, wanted to come and observe. And I think that perhaps we can do some of that, inviting people to come along if they if they've got something to add. That would be really helpful. Okay, so to conclude then, just to sum up, we have agreed that we wish to pursue that. Hazel will kindly provide a report to council for September, and we will, if agreed, write out to the organisations we've highlighted and see where that leads us, members. Okay, thank you. And now we move back, to item 4. Would you, no, item 5, sorry, the Revenue and Capital Outturn Report. And we are very pleased to be joined by John Wood and Eve Parkinson. So welcome, and please do come and take a seat and sit wherever's comfortable for you. Let you get your... I think we have a little bit of technical... So can I welcome you both? I'm aware that this is the first time you've come to committee, John, and so we are all very gentle souls here, and we welcome you greatly. And we're all very clear that you're going to give us an overview of the finance. But if we have service area questions, we will direct those to Eve. And if Eve is not in a position to provide us with the information this morning, then we will write those in a note and get a response later. So we're not expecting you to know things that you might not necessarily be au fait with. So thank you very much, and we look forward to you presenting the overview to us. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is John Woods. I'm here today as deputising for Tyrone Stokes, who is the Social Care Finance Manager. I'm going to present the 18-19 year-end outcome report and go through the bits of the budget which are relevant for this committee. During my report now, I'll be referring to the page numbers which are on the agenda report pack, which was circulated prior to this meeting. These are item 5 on the agenda, and they're on pages 25 to 64, if you've got page numbers. I'll also be mentioning the individual report numbers as well, in case you haven't got the page numbers. The first thing I would like to draw your attention to is on the recommendations in section 2 of the report, which is, if you've got the page numbers, is on page 25 and 26. Can you please note that the net revenue outturn position for the authority as a whole, as in point 2.1, is a surplus of £49,000. I say that is for the authority as a whole. If you'd next like to go to section 3, which is on page 20, starts on page 26 and goes on to page 27, there's details here of the year-end outturn position. If you look at column 5, which is headed as forecast over under at outturn, and you go right to the very bottom on page 27, you'll see the 49,000 surplus in red at the bottom of column 5. If you go back to the top of that table, the first section is the social care and housing, social care and health section. Now, if we solely consider the budgets within social care and health, which are relevant to the adult select, we see that there's a net outturn underspend across those sections of 989,000. Now, these sections would be the adult service line, the community care line, the commissioning line, and the resources and performance line. So the totals in column 5 for those four is a underspend of £989,000. If you go forward now onto pages 34 and 35, which are sections 3.24, it's a bit of a jump, so please bear with me. Then on here you'll find a few more details regarding the adult services position. Just in brief, the underspend mainly comprises of the provision of care within the south of the county, which is being delivered through a reablement team, which is an in-house team, and additional income that we received in the last financial year when we provided interim funding for residential accommodation whilst properties were being put on the market and sold. There's also an underspend illustrated here within the mental health team as a result of vacancies within our joint deprivation of liberties and safeguarding team. Also, as part of the budget setting process for 18-19, Social Care and Health Directorate, we were given savings from the budget of £925,000 to make. These are shown on page 38 of the report under section 3.31. So under social care and health, in the first column on that table, there's £925,000 saving for the financial year 18-19. Of this total, the amount which was put to the adult select profile is £653,000. And these are shown in greater detail in the appendix at the end of the report, Appendix 1, on page 52. there are two savings on here for the Adult Select. The one is £638,000 for practice change within the service, and the other one is £15,000 for increased income from the Meals on Wheels service. Of these two totals, the £638,000 for practice change was achieved in the financial year. The remaining £15,000 for Meals on Wheels was not achievable, and there is a reason given on there for the progress, that meal sales have fallen since the increased price to below the 1,000 meals weekly, which we needed to make the saving. Finally, on page 41, we jump all the way back. There are some capital position of the authority. For this select, the capital schemes total 1.268 million, and they mainly relate to the new Crick Road development, which is funded by intermediate care funding, or which has intermediate care funding, sorry. And that is all that's on the report, which is relevant for this committee.
Well, does that conclude your... Sorry. Thank you very much. Can I say that was a very, very clear walkthrough of some of the key issues in adult services, John. So thank you very much for that. Okay, I've got a couple of questions, but first of all, can I don't know if you want to make any comment, Eve, yet, or do you want to wait to see if there are any questions? Okay, thank you. Okay, members, if you have questions on that outturn, could you please, if they're specific, very financial questions, then perhaps John can either take them or take them back, or if they're service questions, perhaps they can direct them to Eve. Thank you, members.
Probably for Eve, actually, a couple of questions. One is, I know when I first joined the council, there was considerable disquiet among about the number of agency staff that were employed in social care, and also, for example, in fostering the agencies that were being used instead of our own. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about progress that's been made there. And then the second thing is the number of Meals on Wheels reduction. We talked about this before committee started this morning, and we were very, very worried that not only are there fewer people taking the meals now, which means they might not be getting a good cooked meal in the day, but also just that element of somebody knocking on the door and checking they're okay every day. And is there concern within social care as a department about that reduction in the number of meals being taken?
Okay. The first one, from an agency perspective, I can't really specifically answer with regards to children. From an adult's perspective, I think we do have agency workers at times for short periods of time, and they're usually to cover a longer term sickness absence or a maternity where we can't cope with that gap, but we wouldn't be able to recruit in any other way. So I know that at the moment we probably have 2 or 3 agency staff. We do also sometimes have agency staff whereby, as you know, things like the Intermediate Care Fund are short-term projects, and we often have our own staff wanting to get involved in those short-term projects, and then we need to replace them for, say, 6 to 12 months, and we sometimes use agency that way, but that stream of funding comes from elsewhere. Does that answer that? Yeah. Meals on Wheels, it's a complicated one, really. We've been having quite a, for want of a better phrase, deep dive into what goes on in Meals on Wheels, and I think there's a variety of strands with that. I think one is the success of Meals on Wheels, the success of reablement has had an impact in that some people are actually more independent, I think, in making their own meals, whereas before it would have been, okay, let's give someone Meals on Wheels. I think some of the stuff we've done around community connections, luncheon clubs, opportunities for people to come to things at Mardy Park, etc., has also had an impact. Probably some of the marketing around things like Wiltshire Farm Foods also has had an impact in that, you know, the costs can often be quite comparable. But what we have been doing, and there's been a pilot recently, and I don't know if members have heard about this, but Meals on Wheels, the Monmouthshire Meals team recently did quite a big audit, really, of their service and what they provide. And what they asked people was, would you like the driver or the person delivering your meal to spend some time with you at the same time? And a lot of the feedback was yes, they would like, so rather than someone coming in and just delivering a meal, putting it down, being very friendly, of course, etc., and then leaving, they've had a trial of factoring in time where people have got opportunities and choices, as in, do you want someone to actually have a meal with you? Do you want someone to sit down and just have a chat and a cup of tea with you? And so we are working on that, and they factored into their timetables, you know, their delivery timetables, how that could be doable to actually make it more than just delivering a meal, to make it something that is more of a social interaction. And from that, they've started to get to know people, develop relationships, which I know you all know that we think is fundamental to what we deliver, and then started joining people up. So they've had a trial of that, and our plan is to go through our own processes to look at whether that's something viable to try for the future, which would mean that we were offering Monmouthshire Meals Plus.
I wonder if I could just come back very briefly. Are you saying, Eve, that you can put your hand on heart and say that no elderly people are being disadvantaged by the increase in the cost of meals?
I can put my hand on my heart and say nobody's being disadvantaged that we know of.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Eve. Yes, my concern as Councillor Grocott with the Meals on Wheels, because I knew somebody who was receiving Meals on Wheels, and yes, the call had come to the door, but sometimes that person would wash up the dishes, hadn't eaten the food, let it believe that they had eaten, you know, and of course that would be detrimental. I don't think sometimes elderly people need a big meal anyway, because you know, if they're mainly not able to cook. And perhaps as we have progressed through technology, older people now use microwaves and so on, which they didn't, say, 20, 30 years ago. So they're more able to do that sort of thing and not cook on a stove or whatever. But I am concerned that that actual social knock on the door is a crucial part to that Meals on Wheels. And otherwise, you mightn't have so much revenue from Meals on Wheels. But if they don't have that, it could work out very costly in a different sphere of care and that sort of thing. So would they perhaps be prepared to have a meal every other day and not, you know, because sometimes you could have something cold, as long as they're adequately prepared to have some sort of food. I don't think the income of a meal, the cost of it, is relevant to the social care that's needed on those people. And more so nowadays, you've got people that want to live independently, but they also don't have family close at hand to back up and help out as well. So I think it's very crucial that those sort of people don't fall through the net. And because it's very easy for them to say, oh, don't bother, I don't need it today. But, you know, if you're not careful, that can happen too often. And then we have a bigger cost with care afterwards. Thank you, Eve.
Yeah, I think that, you know, we know that loneliness and isolation is a big factor, particularly in rural Monmouthshire. And how Monmouthshire Meals went about it was that they actually sat and had one-to-one face conversations with people. And not surprisingly, a large percentage of those people said that they were lonely and isolated. And, you know, a range of options were offered on what Monmouthshire Meals could do to support them around that. And I think it's very much going to be predicated on flexibility and choice, and whatever opportunities are most appropriate for that person. And I think it's also that what we need to be doing across the whole of the piece is every opportunity to address and understand if somebody is lonely and isolated. We need to take that on.
Yes, thank you, Chair. What I wanted to ask, I did quite a while back volunteer on Meals on Wheels, and did find that basically, you know, there was a driver and somebody delivering the meals, but it was a very you know, extremely quick run around, and you know, there was hardly time to exchange any social interaction, and I think you know, that was of concern because of, I suppose, the amount of meals that you had to deliver, and you know, the time that was allocated to it. So in terms of this trial, I'd be interested to know what sort of time was allocated. And in terms of the meals themselves, I appreciate that there are places like Wiltshire Farm Foods that do have packages that people can purchase. But one of the things is their meals are rather large, and I just wondered whether or not consideration had been given to Meals on Wheels in terms of the size of the meals and whether they were too large for people to actually have. But I mean, even in that sort of dash around with the Meals on Wheels, I mean, there was one occasion when I think somebody else I know who volunteered to do that said that they found somebody in quite distress and they wouldn't have found them otherwise, and then, you know, notified social services of the need for help. So it's that social contact, but it's also things like, for example, you know, checking the fridge, making sure that there's not out-of-date food there, and, you know, whether or not people need other shopping or other requirements. So if it is too mad a dash around, then, you know, those sort of things can't be done. And I just wondered whether what the trial was, and you know, for example, if you served out expected a round to do X number of meals, are you expecting it to do 50% or what? So how does this trial work? Thank you.
Well, thank you. The trial has already been completed, and they're now looking at the outcomes of those. And they did, you know, it was quite a complicated sort of almost time and motion thing. But I think one of the things that there's been an assumption around is that everyone wants to have their midday meal at a certain time, when in actual fact that wasn't exactly the case. So by looking at what people's choices and preferences were, they were able to work the runs in a different way, so that the time that the drivers are out there is a longer time than, you know, so before. And I mean, I've got a very brief, you know, there's a detailed report that I don't know all the ins and outs of everything, but they used to be in the depot for a time before and after delivery, and they've expanded the time that they're actually out on the patch by looking at when people want to have their meals. Some people get up really early, some people get up quite late, some people are happy to have their meal later. So they've been able to factor in a variety of times where they can spend time with people. You know, some, like I said, it's just been 15 minutes. And what they're also proposing is a broader spectrum of things that they would be able to do and provide, again, depending on what that individual wants. As to the meals, people can order smaller portions. So it doesn't have to be a larger meal. And people can also order sandwiches, etc., to be left for a cold supper for later if they want. Is that enough information, Councillor Brown?
Yeah, I just wondered, was there a specific time in terms of, you know, I mean, was when you did the rounds, what did it allow for? You know, obviously there's the travel time and there's the going to the address time. And I just wondered whether or not, you know, say it was a 15-minute period for each, or whether it was, you know, because it's probably quite difficult to work out when you're driving around a different area as to how much time you actually need to get from A to B and then from B to C, etc. So I just wondered whether or not the actual, you know, for example, if it was just 5 minutes in the past and putting it in the freezer and then disappearing, as opposed to 10, 15 minutes now. And I think really to know that would know whether or not it was making any difference.
I think the aim was that people would spend at least up to 15 minutes in somebody's house if that is what they wanted. I mean, there are people who don't, yes. So it was to spend at least up to 15 minutes in that person's house, enough time to have a chat, see if everything was okay, have a cup of tea if they wanted you to have a cup of tea with them. And then I think the aspiration is to look at this and see whether we can take it further to become something even more.
Thank you, Eve. Are there any other members with questions? I've got just a couple, if that's okay. So one is a finance question, John, which there is a reasonable amount of fluctuation, which one would expect. But from your point of view, do you think in the division, you know, in the service areas, the budget monitoring process is robust enough to ensure that we have a really good idea of where areas are likely to overspend and underspend? That's the kind of the finance question, and I've got a couple for Eve.
Well, with the budget monitoring now, we've now moved to a monthly system, starting at month 4, which is at end of July. So from now onwards, we will be doing monitoring on a monthly basis. So the aim of that is to try and pick up any fluctuations, because the whole area does fluctuate can potentially fluctuate up quite a bit. So hopefully it is far more, it was robust previously, but I think it'll be far more robust now going forward, simply because rather than a quarterly basis, we will be looking at the budgets every month. If anything is flagged up as being an issue, we will make everyone aware of it as and when. Okay.
Thank you very much, John. That's really helpful, because I had thought that there looked like quite significant variations. A couple of questions for you, Eve, if I may. I note that what you were talking about, John, in terms of there was a big underspend in the because we were, and I think I have this right, but this one I'm just asking. So instead of using external domiciliary care providers, we have been using, in particular, I think it notes Usk and the south of the county, we have been using our reablement service, which are council-employed staff. And that has resulted in a significant cost saving. Am I correct in that? And if I am correct in that, the question that arises for me is, so why aren't we doing more of that? That's
Well, I think it's a cost saving in one sense, but then it incurs costs in another sense. So basically, the reablement team consists of staff from both the local authority and the health board, and our own direct care services support that team. So when anyone's had a significant injury, incident, issue coming out of hospital or whatever, we operate what we call an intake model, where the ideal is that people will go through reablement so that we can make sure that that their needs are met most appropriately, and we don't give them more care than what they might need, and that they are as independent and able to live that life they want to lead. What's happened is, because there hasn't been the availability in the independent sector, people have effectively become stuck in reablement. So we've ended up with, you know, as many as 13, 14, 15 people stuck in reablement who do need an element of long-term care that we cannot then commission. So our reablement staff are having to continue to support them. That then means that we have limited the number of people who are able to come into reablement. So we then might have people who are stuck in hospital, can't come out of Monavale, or aren't getting the opportunities to access reablement that they should.
Okay, well, we can perhaps, I think that is a point to explore further, members, because one of the things we are looking to do is to understand far more about the domiciliary care services that we provide and commission and how that links, because what you're describing there is a saving, but actually then, and certainly not a saving in the longer term in terms of people coming out. But I'm just interested in that model. Thank you. Sorry, John, do you want to?
Just to add to Eve's point, obviously with the reablement, the main part of that in the Usk area was because we weren't able to get that out to the private providers. They had lack capacity. Recently this year, we have entered into a agreement with one of the providers to provide specific care in the Usk area, but that has been additional cost as well, which wasn't in the spend last year, but will be hitting the budget this year. So that is there, which wasn't in the report I've just given.
Can I just check? Is that due to market forces? So basically, we're having to potentially pay more than we would have because there's a lack of availability.
I think with this particular one, we've made an arrangement with them. They brought in extra staff because there was no availability there with the current system. So we've actually agreed to them that to provide that care.
Yeah, we traditionally, or over the past sort of year or so, you know, we've been down circa 200 and 250 hours just in the Usk area. So we've been trying to commission 250 hours of care for that area. So that obviously has a huge impact on the people living in Usk and on our services. So part of the Turning the World Upside Down, we've sort of gone a bit early in the Usk area because of the dire need. So, and because Usk is, as we all know, you know, quite rural, a little bit more difficult to commission from the independent sector, what we've done is, as John says, we have gone out, you know, tendered out, but one organisation, we've basically given them guaranteed hours. So we've said that we will pay you for 150 hours of care in the Usk area, and we will guarantee that 150 hours. So, you know, we did a lot of modelling around that, looked at what the demand had been. And because of that surety, that provider has then been able to recruit people specifically to that area, but they've also done other things like got lease cars for those staff, and some of the, you know, problems that we know we have in delivering domiciliary care around Monmouthshire, like, you know, people can't afford to run a car, the amount of mileage, etc., they do. Young people can't afford to run cars, so they've tried to accommodate some of those problems, and so far we have everything crossed that it's been very successful.
Okay, thank you. I think that helps us with thinking about what we might want to ask when we come to talk about domiciliary care in much more detail. Councillor Grokert was and Councillor Edwards were both asking around the Meals on Wheels issue. Firstly, can I ask that perhaps we could be circulated with whatever report that you've completed, which may assist us with just understanding a little bit more about the changes. But secondly, you said that no older person had been disadvantaged by the increase in cost to the Meals on Wheels service that you were aware of. And my question was really about, so how do we know? How have we asked those people that have stopped having their meals, for example, and what kind of analysis, because it was one of the things that irked me quite a lot when we were doing budget, was what kind of assessment have we done on socioeconomic grounds of, you know, these changes. It you know, it was alongside the Breakfast Club. I think it does say that we need to strengthen that. Well, we should be kind of doing that all along, hopefully. So I'm hoping that that we are really clear about whether there are any older people. It would seem to be a little bit of a coincidence that we've increased the cost and that we've had a decrease in take-up, if that makes sense, Eve.
Yeah, for specifics, I'd have to put that one in abeyance for a little while and get some details of Pauline Batty, who runs the service. But I do know that if at any point anyone wants to discontinue the service, that, you know, they're asked about what the reasons are. And if it's a financial reason, then we will be looking at that from a broader perspective.
Actually, when you say the cost has gone up per meal, is it that some of them are still getting meals, but instead of having 5, they're having 3, so at least you'd still have that contact, you know, week to week anyway?
Yeah, and I think there's a whole host of reasons why the numbers have gone down. And I think, like I said before, you know, some of the initiatives that we've worked very hard on developing across the county around other opportunities for people have also had an impact, you know. So there's lots of things that go on in the variety of areas, particularly Mardy Park and Monnow Vale, whereby there are other opportunities rather than just Monmouthshire Meals, which is what we want, really. You know, we want Monmouthshire Meals to be part of the bigger intervention if somebody is lonely and isolated, or if they need something else. But for the specifics, I would have to go back to Pauline.
Louise has a question, and then we'll...
Yeah, just a thought, because previously you mentioned about on Meals on Wheels that, you know, they could get smaller meals if that's what they wanted. And I just wondered, obviously there's in terms of price increases, there's a standard price, and I just wondered whether you know, that option, if they wanted it of a smaller meal, was I'm not saying necessarily a smaller meal because they can't afford a bigger meal, but I'm just saying, you know, if that option is available, and you know, I'm not sure how well that was put across. Is it just a question of, you know, if somebody says I find the meals too big, that they're offered that option, or is that option sort of part of the standard price list, if you see what I mean, so that if it was suitable for them, and you know, that if price basically was a factor in reducing the number of meals, and obviously if you know, they do in pubs, you know, smaller OAP meals because of appetites, and I just wondered about whether that was just only if you asked for it, or if they were fully aware that there was a standard price and a reduced price for smaller meals.
I have to be honest, Councillor Ransford, I don't really know. I don't know the level of detail around what's offered, but I can certainly find that out.
Thank you, Eve. If that's all the questions that members have, I think that, so to kind of sum up, we've noted your report with some great interest. We are, I think it's fair to say, interested that you have increased the budget monitoring frequency, taking account of you know, what can be quite significant fluctuations in and variance in your budgets, and we understand that is a factor. But I think having potentially a more robust monthly monitoring system in place is, you know, perhaps gives us some assurance that will, going forward, as the council faces even greater challenges, may assist. We were particularly interested to note the issues you raised regarding savings that occurred due to the use of the reablement service rather than external domiciliary care providers. and this committee has already agreed that it wished to have a much, we'll use your terminology here, Eve, and call it a deeper dive. I don't particularly like that term either, but into domiciliary care, because we think it is an area with quite a lot of issues and threads that we would wish to understand better. I think that's there is some concern there. I think perhaps about how the external market, the fragility of the sector. Would members agree that yes, that's something we wish to pursue further? We also spent some time talking around Meals on Wheels in particular, and I think this committee has noted the drop off in the numbers of meals that are allocated. We also that are taken up to less than 1,000 per week. We note the work that's been done with great interest around trying to use the Meals on Wheels service, or we don't call it we call it community meals, sorry, apologies, community meal service, to provide a community meal service plus potentially to address some of the wider issues around loneliness and isolation, and we look forward to receiving some detail about that. However, we also just have some concern that we'd like to, receive assurance on around the fact that there aren't older people being disadvantaged due to the increase in price, and we were seeking some assurance around what that actually looks like in real terms, how many people were taking on the meals, how many people are there now, and what, and also I suppose there is an issue there really about gathering that information. People may not wish to say that there was a financial reason why they've stopped having the service, so I'll be interested in that. Are we in agreement, members, that we want to just receive some assurance on that point? I'm just trying to think, were there any other issues that we were particularly, and no other issues that we wish to identify in particular in that? Yes. Oh, yeah, go on, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I just wondered about, it would be good to have some feedback about how sort of a reduced price in terms of size of meals was put forward to people, whether it's just an option that they get offered if they ask, or if, it's something that is readily available, because I think that would make the meals more competitive in comparison with the private ones.
I don't know. I think, look, if we want some information on that, that's fine. But I think we just have to be a little bit careful about that. I'm not sure. I certainly wasn't aware that option was available, and I think
I don't actually think that option. I don't 100% know, but I'm not sure that it's actually any different cost in price, because the majority of the cost is around the service and the travel, etc., and the purchase of the meals. It's negligible pence if you get a smaller, to an ordinary sized meal.
Well, can I extend our thanks to John and Eve for talking us through that outturn report. Thank you very much. I think that's been really helpful and leads us to probably more questions, members. But thank you very much. Thank you, John. Thank you. I hope it wasn't too terrible. Perhaps you'll return to see us at some point, John. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you, members. That concludes the reports that we have to discuss today. So can we go to the minutes of the ordinary meeting on the 18th of June? I have to say, sorry, I'm just going to find them now because I haven't got a printed copy. I read them and felt that they were, thank you, a very accurate set of minutes, but I don't know if there are any items. So for accuracy, if I can take you through, members, page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, page 12, page 13, and page 14. Any issues of accuracy, members? No? Can we all agree that they are a true record of that meeting? Could you please show members if you agreed? Agree? Proposer, seconder? Propose that it is indeed a true record? Yes? Okay. Thank you very much, members. Okay. List of actions. Just bear with me one moment, members, while I get the technology to go down to the list. Oh. Never wants to do it when you want. Right, okay. There we are. Okay, list of actions. So we did indeed make our recommendation on housing policy, members, and you will have seen that we recommended a hybrid. You will have seen that Councillor Greenland is going to pursue option 1, but that he acknowledged the issues that we were raising. On item 6, the impact of the rollout of universal credit, we did indeed write to reaffirm our approach and to support increasing potentially or considering an increase to discretionary housing payment finance. We wrote to a number of cabinet members, and that letter was circulated to you members, and Councillor Jones, Sarah Jones, has written back acknowledging our recommendation and requesting to meet further, suggesting that indeed she would want to consider any potential options, but that, of course, members, and I'll forward you the email, or there are a number of pressures that face the council, and we all acknowledge that. So I will indeed arrange to meet Councillor Jones, and will report back to you, advise you, send you an email of our discussions. So thank you for your deliberation. I think it's useful to write to the cabinet member and indeed get a response. So that's good. We also noted, members, the annual housing performance report and the link to the LDP, and we were going to look at what kind of information we wanted further regarding housing and the role that it could play in wider social care. So that is under development. Can I take you to item 9, which is the Select Committee Forward Programme? So 2 things to note here. I think that you'll note that we're quite light on our September 24th meeting. However, and I'm going to meet with Eve just shortly, we are looking to bring an item around the domiciliary care provision forward, hopefully to that meeting. We have also had some consideration, do you want to say about this, of a joint meeting to...
Yeah, I was wondering whether with economy in the morning we could switch, maybe and have economy in the afternoon, do that in the morning.
Yeah, that would work for me. Just to say, members, you've been circulated with some details, I believe, around having a special adult select on the 5th of September so that the director of social care, I'm not sure the title these days, can present jointly with CIP her report. And we were looking at the afternoon. I know that both Penny Jones and Julie are away in the afternoon, and so we were going to see if it is indeed possible to swap it with the morning, because there's an economy and development select in the morning, to see whether at all if it's possible to swap those around so that we would be in the morning of the 5th and economy and development would be in the afternoon, because that's going to be apparently quite a full agenda. We are also, I think, awaiting some further we've had the visits to the Gypsy Traveller site. I don't know if anything's going to come forward in time for our 24th.
I think it's workshops.
Oh, okay. We're going to have, okay. So we'll be looking for some dates for workshops. We will let you know if we manage to procure any further reports. But are there any items in particular from anything you've heard today that you would like Hazel to pursue, you know, getting onto our agenda, whether for September or beyond?
Yes, the chair has asked us whether we can possibly change the date because I think you're not available on that date. The other thing is to note that although we talked about the health board coming back, they've not confirmed that they can make the 22nd of October, but we were working towards bringing you a report on disabled facility grants and sort of coming off the back of a discussion you had at your last meeting, and we were working for October for that report. So really, we would be looking then to hold a meeting with the health board after that. So although this plan looks light, when you take into account that the chair and I have some possible plans for September, we've already got a confirmed report for October, which will be quite a detailed report. As well as then having the health board in potentially in November. You could have a special there, or you could have a special in October. We're thinking perhaps December onwards in terms of your work programme.
Can I just ask, if you're going to change the date, I think it would be wise to do it now if you know that date's not going to work, so that we've got time to diarise. It's very difficult to fit in special meetings and changes of date at short notice.
If it's okay with you, can we ask Democratic Services to do that following this meeting? Because obviously we need to make sure rooms available and so forth and check availabilities.
And perhaps we can also chase up the health board to see if they can provide us with some dates that then would work for a meeting, so that...
It would be helpful to me if you could give me a sort of sentence now, a bit more detail of exactly what you want to call the health board in for, because obviously we did ask them to provide some information after they arrived last time, and they were going to prepare an action plan. I have asked them for that, and they've come back to say they're on the case. So I mean, we know that we're to expect an action plan, but I think some committee members have hinted in the past that they want to have some wider discussions around some of the services. So if you can give me some information now, then it's obviously easier for the health board to decide who would need to be there and to set a date.
I think the issue, I've been to several presentations, and the issue here is everybody wants to know the latest situation regarding the new critical care centre and the changes to the other hospitals. So I think that is number one priority, that we need the latest information on that, because it is changing all the time. I've been to several and we've been advised of different things. But getting the message out to people is something we've asked for us to be given newsletters or information that we can circulate and pass on, and how they're circulating this information out to members of the public, because people are very concerned about these changes. And despite all the sort of presentations I've been to, we're not getting a lot of clear answers as to what's happening in our local hospitals, and arrangements actually to transport people back and forth from to the critical care centres in emergencies.
Are there any other items that you would wish to be discussing with the health board members? Are there any, because it's helpful if Hazel can identify those things for them. So if there are any other matters For example, you know, we've touched only very briefly on with the housing, when we had the housing presentation around mental health services and aftercare, for example. Is there any, because I suppose sometimes there can be, you know, who provides what when somebody leaves a mental health service. And we've heard today around providing accommodation for people who are in that particular position. Anyway, it might not be that that's your particular interest, but if there are items, could I ask you, and perhaps we can email the other members who aren't here at the moment, to just clarify if they've got any particular issues. We won't be able to cover them all clearly, but you know, we might have to prioritise what we want them to discuss.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the things that, following on from what has just been said about the impact on the local hospitals, I mean, before the last session we had from the Health Board, I sent a number of detailed questions, and the problem is with the Health Board presentations, we tend to get a general overview, but we don't know, for example, we never get lists of what the current services are and what the services after the change will be, and, you know, the likely dates when these will be implemented. So that is the problem, is that it's all a very general presentation that doesn't actually give you facts, you know. So, for example, if you've got a particular health issue, you never find out whether or not that service is going to be available still at your local hospital, or if it's going to transfer elsewhere, or if the new services are coming in and by what date. And I did ask quite a number of questions before the last meeting, and I didn't get any specific answers on those at all, you know. So it took me some time to think of the questions. Unfortunately, because I had a conflict with another meeting, I wasn't able to be at the meeting. But again, when we go to Lower Y Committee, we ask them, you know, can we have a list of what the current services, inpatient and outpatient, are, and what you project they will be in future? And we never, ever get that detail of information. It's always a general overview and gloss over, and I think that's what's so frustrating about having the Health Board come along. I don't know whether you want me to go on to what I would suggest is a future agreed work programme, because under that there is, under the first point of the next page, there is the future commissioning of adult services linked to turning the world upside down performance service change. Now, that happened a while back and we haven't had any report on how it's going. I mean, extra staff have been employed and we've got no feedback on that at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. We're going to discuss that with Eve just shortly. So what updates need to come? I think we can agree, members, to write to the Health Board asking for the information that was agreed in, I think was it March? The March meeting. And to what extent they could provide at this point in time some information about where services are. And I'll just declare an interest here because I am a member of an Aaron Bevan University Health Board. So I'll, and no, we're not making any decisions, so it's not prejudicial, but just to clarify that for the public, that so we need to follow up on those items because members do need to have that information. Otherwise, it would seem that they haven't best spent their time in a select if they don't feel that they're getting the responses. Yeah.
I have chased them recently, and as I say, the answer was they're on the case. But that's as far as I've got an answer from them. Can I just check whether you're saying you suggested mental health services and aftercare? Is that something then that you'd like me to mention to them? Is that something that you want them to come and talk to you about?
I think it's a big issue at the moment, isn't it? You know,
The chair mentioned it, but nobody else kind of supported and said, yes, we'd like to do that. It would really help me to have a clear brief, because part of the issue with getting the Health Board to come to scrutiny and getting the information that you need, and I take on board Councillor Brown's point, she did ask for those things and we didn't get them, but if we're going to get the answers we need, we have to be very, very specific about what it is we want, because when we call them in, we just have a generalised discussion. We don't get detail on things.
And sorry, my point was very much about the joint, because that's a joint service, you know, it's a joint provision of service. So we provide services along with the health board, and it was more how we can understand some of those joint services better. And I mentioned mental health because it's one of those where the lines are actually probably reasonably blurry, and so would help us to understand what it is that we're providing jointly and where the challenges are for us. Sorry, Ruth.
That's all right. Thank you, Chair. And also, if we're having this meeting now in October, I believe that's when they start publicising flu vaccinations. Have they got any figures into what the uptake was last year and what sort of cases were as a result of not having vaccination and those sort of things? And also that there's been a bit of a lobby about some parents trying to persuade other parents not to immunise their children against different things like measles and so on, that we had more or less, you know, got rid of. And if we're not careful, it'll start to come back again. And when we go into the winter, they should by now have some sort of feedback from what happened last winter before we go into next winter, and so that we could address it. Just to say, Chair, we should, Ruth, we should be able to get those figures very easily because they are figures that are reported to Welsh Government. So MMR immunisations and flu vaccinations are reported. They're Tier 1 targets to Welsh Government. So we should be able to easily get that information. It's public information that have gone to the Health Board, so we should be able to get that. Okay, if you have very clear, firm suggestions, then could I ask you to drop a line to Hazel if there's something that comes to mind that it hasn't been covered, so we can clarify and be very clear. We may want to split our meeting into two parts, for example, and have more of a workshop part, which maybe we could be more of a discussion rather than a formal presentation, and then move into because we may be able to get more interaction, more out of it, more as a, you know, which we might want to suggest to them. What do you think about that, members? Because what I'm hearing from you is that the formal presentations don't always provide the information that you're looking for. So if we did something of that nature, I don't know, I'd leave it to Hazel to think about the how, but we may want to consider thinking about how we would do that so that we provide some room for informal discussion, which is not in committee, which is not live streamed, but which is informal discussion on maybe picking up on some points that you've discussed previously. And then, I don't know, we'd have to structure it well to make sense. But we can have that conversation with them perhaps to see how best that might work, perhaps. That's an option anyway we can consider. We can let you know how we go with that. Sorry, Councillor.
Yes, following on from what you just suggested, if we're going to have workshop style, would it be worth expanding the invitations to this to other members, maybe make it a joint select or something along those lines? I mean, if we're going to have workshops, I think the more involvement, the more people that are here, we're going to get a lot more out of it, aren't we?
And I leave that in Hazel's very capable hands. If we do manage to procure some sort of informal workshop part with the Health Board, then yes, absolutely, we may very well want to, you know, open that up as an invitation to more members. But obviously, we'll have some discussion around that to see what might work best.
Yes, I mean, we can have a discussion about how that would work. The only thing to bear in mind is if you want to hold people to account formally, the select committee is the place to do that. When you're asking questions and you want answers to those questions, you'll have the likes of the chief executive and those senior clinicians who would be able to answer those questions. Workshops is more discursive. You would be able to perhaps say what you think your communities need in terms of information and perhaps give them some guidance on, you know, where they might be failing in terms of current engagement, that kind of thing. But I think you need to be careful what it is you want specific answers from, and which way would be the best way of getting what you want. So perhaps this is something the chair and I could discuss afterwards and try and flesh out, because it's horses for different courses, I'm afraid.
Members, and I think that with that we've just need to, so as you've heard, we are just wishing to clarify a date for a select, but we the formal date for our next meeting is the 24th of September 2018, and with that I think we've concluded our agenda, unless anybody's got any particular points they wish to raise. And we will indeed, as per Councillor Woodhouse's suggestion, endeavour to ensure we get those any change of meetings diarised as soon as possible, because I'm in complete agreement with you. It's much more difficult to diarise things later. Councillor Powell.
Yeah, sorry, the sooner you can do that, the better. And I wonder whether it wouldn't be beneficial to send out the new date and impress upon them we want to know who is coming, because it's been very disappointing at some of our meetings, not just this committee, other selects, all meetings, when you've got people coming in, especially at the health board, and we've got just a smattering of councillors when there could be a lot more, because it gives a bad impression. And you know, if you can possibly get people to tell you whether they're coming or not, it does help, doesn't it?